The scent of fresh paint and new carpet still hung in the air. A clean slate smell Anthony McAllister had craved for years. He stood in the living room of his new house, a modest but solid two-story on the shores of Lake Keowee, watching the afternoon sun dance across the water. His realtor, Jessica Ramirez, a woman whose energy seemed to defy the humid South Carolina heat, beamed as she pressed a small, elegant box into his hand. "Congratulations, Anthony. Welcome to Heron Point." Inside the box lay two new keys, their brass edges sharp and promising. He closed his fingers around them, the metal cool against his skin. After the chaos of the city, the cramped apartment, and the lingering ache of a life he'd had to leave behind, this felt like the first deep breath he'd taken in a decade, a sanctuary, his sanctuary. "Thank you, Jessica, for everything." "My pleasure," she said, her smile genuine. "Just remember what we talked about with the HOA docs. They're thick, but know your rights. This community is beautiful, but the board can be particular." He nodded. The thick binder of covenants, conditions, and restrictions sitting on the granite countertop like an unread textbook. He'd deal with it later. Today was for celebrating. As Jessica gathered her briefcase, a shadow fell across the open doorway. A woman stood there, silhouetted against the bright afternoon. She was tall and slender, dressed in crisp linen trousers and a pale blue silk blouse that seemed immune to wrinkles. Her silver blonde hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and she held a leather-bound portfolio under one arm. She didn't knock. She simply appeared, her presence immediately commanding the space. "Anthony McAllister." Her voice was polite, but with an edge of clinical precision. Anthony straightened. "Yes, that's me." The woman stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the empty room before settling on the expansive windows overlooking the lake and the private dock that stretched out from the property. "I'm Elaine Porter, president of the Heron Point Homeowners Association." She extended a hand, her grip firm and brief. "I live just across the cul-de-sac. I like to personally welcome all our new residents." "It's a pleasure to meet you," Anthony said, forcing a warmth he didn't quite feel. Elaine's smile didn't reach her eyes. They remained fixed on the view. "A beautiful view," she said, her tone conversational, but carrying an undeniable weight. "Just so we're clear from the outset, the dock is considered a community amenity under our architectural guidelines. Any modifications or exclusive use will require Architectural Control Committee approval." Anthony blinked. He felt a slow, cold prickle of confusion. He glanced at Jessica, whose professional smile had tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. "I'm sorry," he said. Turning back to Elaine, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. The dock and the lakefront are part of my property. It's specified in the deed." Elaine's smile held. It was a patient, placid expression, the kind a teacher might give a student who has offered a charming but incorrect answer. "Ah, the deed. Yes. A common point of confusion. Our governing documents, which supersede individual deeds on matters of community standards, contain certain clauses regarding view corridors and common use traditions. Specifically, architectural control." She patted her portfolio. "I'd be happy to send you the relevant sections. We've found it's best to establish these understandings early. It saves everyone unpleasantness." The word hung in the air, a polite, veiled threat wrapped in the language of helpfulness, unpleasantness. He was holding the keys to his dream home, and a stranger was standing in his living room, calmly informing him that a core piece of that dream didn't actually belong to him. Jessica stepped forward, her voice smooth as glass. Elaine. It's good to see you. I'm sure Anthony will be a wonderful neighbor. We have the plat map and the survey right here, and the property lines are quite clear. The dock is deeded to this lot. Elaine's gaze shifted to Jessica, and for a fraction of a second, the placid mask slipped. A flicker of something hard and territorial flashed in her eyes before being replaced by the same serene smile. Of course. Jessica. No one is disputing the lines on a map. We are simply enforcing the covenants that every homeowner agrees to abide by upon closing. It's a matter of maintaining the aesthetic and communal harmony of Heron Point. She turned back to Anthony. Enjoy settling in. I'll have our management company forward you the welcome packet. It outlines everything you need to know. With another clipped, professional nod, she turned and walked out, her steps echoing on the new hardwood floors. Anthony stood in the sudden silence, the keys feeling heavier in his hand. The clean slate smell of the house now seemed tainted with something else, something complex and bureaucratic. He looked out at the dock, his dock, and saw it not as a place of peaceful retreat, but as the first battleground in a war he never intended to fight. For Anthony, a 42-year-old mechanical engineer, life was a system of logical inputs and predictable outputs. He designed HVAC systems for commercial high-rises, a world of schematics, load calculations, and precise tolerances. There was comfort in the order of it all. Chaos, both emotional and professional, was a variable to be engineered out of existence. That was why, after his divorce 2 years prior, a messy, unpredictable collapse of a system he thought was stable, he had funneled every spare moment and dollar into this single goal, a house on the water. A place where the variables were limited to the weather and the tide. A place of peace. The house in Heron Point wasn't just a structure. It was a carefully designed solution to a life that had grown too loud and confining in his cramped Columbus apartment. The quiet lapping of the lake, the sturdy presence of the pines, the solitary work of maintaining a home, these were the inputs he believed would produce an output of tranquility. His quiet aversion to conflict wasn't a weakness, he told himself, but a preference for efficiency. Confrontation was inefficient. A messy algorithm of raised voices and bruised egos that rarely produced a logical outcome. A project at his last firm had taught him that lesson the hard way, when challenging a senior partner's flawed design had led not to a better product, but to his own quiet marginalization. He'd learned to pick his battles, and his primary battle now was for his own mental health. In the first few days, he lost himself in the rhythms of moving in. He unpacked boxes, assembled furniture, and organized his garage workshop with the meticulous precision he applied to his blueprints. His only companion was Max, his sister's aging golden retriever, a gentle soul whose quiet companionship was the perfect balm. On the second day, a woman with a kind, crinkled smile and a cascade of silver hair appeared at his door holding a bundt cake. "I'm Pamela, from next door," she said, her voice warm and welcoming. "Thought you might need a break from cardboard boxes." Anthony felt an immediate sense of relief. Anthony McAllister. Thank you. This is incredibly kind. Pamela, a retired librarian, had a calming presence as they chatted on his porch, Max resting his head on her shoe. She offered gentle insights into the neighborhood. She spoke of the book club, the annual chili cook-off, and the best time to see the blue herons nesting across the cove. Then, her tone shifted subtly. "I saw Elaine Porter stopped by on your first day," she said, her gaze drifting toward the immaculate lawn of the house across the cul-de-sac. "She can be a bit much." "She mentioned something about my dock," Anthony said, trying to sound casual. Pamela gave a knowing, sympathetic sigh. Ah, yes, the dock. She has a particular fixation on the lakefront. Just be careful. Anthony. Elaine runs the HOA like it's her own personal fiefdom. Most people just find it easier to go along with her to keep the peace. It was a gentle warning. An offhand piece of advice that echoed his own conflict-averse instincts. Later that evening, fueled by Pamela's cake and a desire for clarity, Anthony finally opened the formidable HOA binder. He methodically flipped through the pages of legalese, his engineer's mind parsing the dense text. He found the section on architectural control. His eyes scanned past rules on satellite dishes, fence heights, and paint colors until they landed on a specific clause Jessica had flagged for him. CC&R, for 8.4.2, Architectural Control over View Corridors. No structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain upon any lot which may damage or interfere with any established scenic easement or view corridor from the common areas without prior written approval of the Architectural Control Committee ACC. He read it twice. It seemed like standard boilerplate. The kind of vague, catch-all rule designed to prevent someone from building a monstrosity that blocked a shared view. His dock wasn't new. It was an existing structure shown on every survey. It couldn't possibly apply. He closed the binder, dismissing the clause as irrelevant and Elaine's comments as a simple power play from a bored HOA president. It was a mistake, a miscalculation born of his desire for a simple, logical world. That would soon come back to haunt him. The system he was entering was not governed by logic, but by interpretation, and Elaine Porter was its sole, unyielding interpreter. A week passed in a haze of productive labor. The house began to feel like a home. He'd hung pictures, set up his design workstation overlooking the lake, and spent an entire afternoon on the dock, a cold drink in hand, watching the sailboats drift by. For a few blissful days, the interaction with Elaine felt like a bad first impression. Nothing more. The quiet he had purchased was settling over him. Then came the certified letter. It was day 10. The mail carrier, a cheerful man named Stan, knocked on the door instead of leaving the lime green slip in the box. Got a certified one for you. Mr. McAllister. Needs a signature. Anthony signed the electronic pad, a knot of apprehension tightening in his stomach. Certified mail was never good news. It was the delivery method of tax audits, legal notices, and official complaints. He took the crisp, white envelope inside and slid it open with a kitchen knife. The letterhead was from Patriot Management, the third-party company that ran the HOA's day-to-day operations. The tone was coldly professional, a world away from Elaine's feigned neighborliness. Official notice of violation. Date October 12, 2023. Property 114. Heron Point Drive. Owner Anthony McAllister. Certified mail tracking. 70119 0140 0001 2345 6789. Dear Mr. McAllister, this letter serves as a formal notice of a violation of the Heron Point Homeowners Association's covenants, conditions, and restrictions CC&Rs. An inspection conducted on October 10, 2023, identified the following infraction. Violation CC&R, ROC 8.4.2, unauthorized structure impeding a designated view corridor. Description: the dock structure located at the rear of your property constitutes an unauthorized impediment to the scenic view corridor from the community common area and beach located at Westover Lane. Furthermore, your assertion of exclusive private use of this structure is in conflict with the community's long-standing use of the lakefront as a shared amenity, which the Board considers an established right protected under this clause. Required action. You are hereby required to submit a formal application to the Architectural Control Committee (ACC) for retroactive approval of the existing dock structure within 15 days of the date of this notice. This application must include an acknowledgement of the dock's status as a community use amenity. Failure to comply will result in further enforcement action, including daily fines and potential liens placed on your property. As outlined in the HOA's collections policy, you have the right to request a hearing before the Board of Directors to dispute this violation. A hearing request must be submitted in writing within 10 days. Sincerely, the Heron Point Board of Directors, CO Patriot Management. Anthony read the letter 3 times. His hands were trembling slightly, not with fear, but with a surge of cold, precise anger. This was no longer a casual warning or a misunderstanding. It was a formal, documented, and utterly baseless challenge. They had twisted a vague clause about view corridors into a legal pretext to seize control of his private property. The reference to the community beach across the water was insidious, a clever way to frame his private dock as an obstruction to a public view. The language was suffocating, a weaponized form of bureaucracy designed to intimidate and overwhelm. He walked over to the window and stared at the dock. It sat there, solid and unassuming, just as it had for decades. From the small, sandy patch of common area on the other side of the cove, his dock was just one of a dozen others lining the shore. It impeded nothing. The seed of conflict Elaine had planted on his first day had sprouted. This certified letter was its first venomous flower. His sanctuary was officially under siege. The fight he had spent his life avoiding had just been delivered to his doorstep, requiring a signature. Anthony's engineer brain kicked into high gear. An illogical premise had been presented. The solution was to counter it with overwhelming, irrefutable logic. He would treat this not as a personal attack, but as a systems error in the HOA's processing. He would provide the correct data, and the system would correct itself. He spent the next hour assembling a polite but formidable email. He scanned his deed, the official county plat map, highlighting his property lines extending into the lake, and the property survey from his closing. He attached them all as clearly labeled PDF files. To Compliance, a Patriot Management, COM, CC, Board of Heron Point, .org. Subject Response to Violation Notice. 142, Heron Point Drive. Dear Patriot Management and Heron Point Board of Directors, I am writing in response to the official Notice of Violation, dated October 12, 2023, tracking 07019 01400 0001 2345 6789, which I received today. There appears to be a significant misunderstanding regarding the application of CC&R paragraph 8.4.2 to my property. The dock structure in question is not a community amenity, nor is it an unauthorized structure. It is, and has been since the lot was first developed, part of the private property deeded to 114 Heron Point Drive. To clarify this matter, I have attached the following documents. 1. Recorded deed, clearly stating that the property includes exclusive riparian rights and ownership of the dock. 2. Official county plat map, delineating the property boundaries, which extend from the shore into the lake, encompassing the area of the dock. 3. Property survey, a certified survey from my closing that confirms the information in the plat map. These legal documents definitively establish my private ownership. Therefore, CC&R paragraph 8.4.2, which governs structures interfering with views from common areas, is not applicable. As the HOA does not have architectural control over this pre-existing structure on my private land. The claim that my dock impedes a view corridor is also unfounded, as it is one of many similar structures on the lake and does not obstruct any unique or protected view. I trust this information will clear up the error. Please confirm in writing that the violation has been rescinded and my account is clear. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, Anthony McAllister, 114, Heron Point Drive. He hit send, feeling a sense of calm control. The evidence was undeniable. The paper trail was absolute. Any reasonable person, any logical system, would process this new data and arrive at the correct conclusion. He had done his part. Now, the ball was in their court. He expected a retraction, perhaps a terse apology for the clerical error, within a day or two. 2 days later, the reply landed in his inbox. It was not an apology. From Compliance, a Patriot Management. Com. Subject RE. Response to Violation Notice. 114, Heron Point Drive. Mr. McAllister, your correspondence and attachments have been received and reviewed by the Board of Directors. The Board's interpretation of CC&R Paragraph 8.4.2 stands. The governing documents grant the Association broad architectural control to maintain the aesthetic standards and communal harmony of the neighborhood. The Board has determined that your assertion of exclusive use over the dock structure is inconsistent with these standards. As stated in the original notice, you may request a hearing, should you wish to do so. Your written request must be received within the 10-day window from your receipt of the violation. Patriot Management. Anthony stared at the screen, the words blurring. He felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he realized his old boss was deliberately sabotaging his work. This wasn't a systems error. This wasn't a mistake. The Board's interpretation stands. That single sentence was a declaration of war. It meant that facts didn't matter. Deeds didn't matter. The law didn't matter. All that mattered was their interpretation. They weren't just wrong. They were willfully, deliberately wrong. This was not about a dock or a view. It was about power raw, arbitrary, and absolute. The illusion of a logical process shattered, leaving only the stark reality of the situation. He was not dealing with a reasonable system. He was dealing with Elaine Porter, and she was not interested in a correction. She was interested in his submission. The curt email from Patriot Management was a catalyst. Anthony's initial shock hardened into a steely resolve. The engineer in him, trained to find and fix systemic flaws, saw this as the ultimate design challenge, dismantling a corrupt and illogical system. The conflict was no longer just about his property. It was about the principle. His first step was to follow their twisted procedure to the letter. He drafted a formal request for a hearing, citing his right to be heard as per their own notice. He sent it via certified mail. Return receipt requested, creating another piece for his growing paper trail. Next, he needed more information. He drove to the management company's office, a sterile, soulless suite in a suburban office park. He submitted a formal, written request for official HOA documents, invoking his rights as a homeowner under state law. He asked for the last 3 years of board meeting minutes, the current budget, all vendor contracts, and the association's bylaws. The receptionist, a young woman with a practiced, impassive expression, informed him that his request had to be submitted on Form 11B and would be processed within 10 business days. It was another layer of bureaucratic obstruction, but he filled out the form with painstaking neatness and left with a copy. That evening, he took Max for a long walk and found himself near the home of Pamela, his kind, librarian neighbor. He decided to take a chance. When she answered the door, he explained the situation. showing her the violation notice and the board's dismissive email. Pamela read the documents, her warm expression hardening. I knew she was a bully. But this is beyond the pale. The board's interpretation stands. What absolute arrogance. She looked at him, her eyes sharp. You need to talk to Frank Delaney. The man from the meeting. Yes. He's a retired forensic accountant. He served on the board for a decade before Elaine staged her little coup 10 years ago. He knows where all the bodies are buried. Metaphorically speaking. He despises what she's done to this community. But he's been waiting for someone with the spine and the legal standing to actually fight back. She gave him Frank's address. The next day, Anthony walked over, his binder of documents in hand. Frank, a man in his late 70s with a surprisingly firm handshake and piercing blue eyes, invited him in. His home office was a testament to a life of order filing cabinets, spreadsheets on a large monitor, and perfectly aligned stacks of paper. Anthony laid out the situation. Frank listened intently, nodding slowly as he examined the deed, the plat map, and the violation notice. He tapped a finger on the phrase, scenic view corridor. That's her weapon of choice, Frank said, his voice a low grumble. It's vague enough that she can apply it to almost anything she doesn't like. She used it 3 years ago to force the Millers to cut down a 20-year-old magnolia tree. Claimed it was blocking the character of the streetscape. He leaned back in his chair. This isn't about your doc. Son, it never is with her. It's about control. But you've got something the Millers didn't. You've got a deed that explicitly contradicts her. She's overplayed her hand. Frank agreed to help. He was a font of procedural knowledge, explaining the nuances of board hearings, the importance of meeting minutes as a legal record, and the power of a formal records request. She'll stonewall you on the documents, Frank warned. But the law says she has to provide them. When she does, we'll find something. The pressure from Elaine's side mounted. On Tuesday morning, as Anthony wheeled his trash and recycling bins back from the curb, he saw her watching him from her window. An hour later, an email from Patriot Management arrived. A new violation. Violation. Rules and Regulations. Royer 3.7. Improper storage of waste receptacles. Description: waste receptacles were observed to be visible from the street at 10:00 a.m. on Tuesday, October 24th. As per the community rules, all receptacles must be removed from public view by 8:00 a.m. on the day of collection. This constitutes a second violation on your account. The rule was real. He'd skimmed it in the handbook, but it was a petty, selectively enforced technicality. He had been a few hours late. It was a clear act of harassment, a message that she was watching his every move, ready to bury him under an avalanche of trivial infractions. The fight was expanding, moving from the grand principle of property rights to the grinding, day-to-day war of attrition that was Elaine's specialty. Anthony meticulously filed the new violation notice in his binder. The pile of evidence was growing, and with it, his resolve. 10 business days after Anthony submitted Form 11B, a thick manila envelope arrived from Patriot Management. It contained the HOA documents he had requested. He immediately took them over to Frank Delaney's house. They spread the papers across Frank's large dining room table. For hours, they pored over budgets, bylaws, and vendor agreements, the scent of old paper and fresh coffee filling the air. The budget was bloated, especially in a few key areas. The line item for common area landscaping and lakefront maintenance was particularly egregious, nearly double what it had been 5 years ago. Look at this, Frank said, pointing to a series of invoices from a company called Scenecscapes LLC. The charges were vague: seasonal planting, shoreline erosion control, aquatic weed management, and the costs were astronomical. Then, they got to the board meeting minutes. They were sanitized, filled with procedural jargon, and motions passed without any record of debate. But as they reviewed the minutes from the previous March, Anthony noticed something odd. "Frank, look at this page," he said, under the heading, New Business Approval of Vendor Contracts. There was a large, black rectangle. The entire section detailing the discussion and vote had been redacted. To protect proprietary vendor information, Frank read from a small footnote at the bottom of the page. That's garbage. Under state law, financial decisions are supposed to be transparent to the homeowners. They can't just black out whatever they want. Anthony felt a familiar prickle of suspicion. A redacted document was not an absence of information. It was a loud, screaming signal that information was being hidden. Frank stared at the blacked-out section, a thoughtful frown on his face. Scenecscapes. That name sounds familiar. He stood up and walked to his office, returning with an old neighborhood directory from a few years back. He flipped through the pages. Elaine's sister, Margaret. Her husband is David Porter. No. Wait, that's not right. He passed away. She remarried a few years ago. A fellow named Jim Sterling. Frank's eyes widened. He strode over to his computer and typed Scenecscapes, LLC, South Carolina, into a search engine. The company's website popped up, a generic page with stock photos of manicured lawns. He clicked on the About Us tab. The founder and president was listed as James Jim Sterling. The room went silent. Her brother-in-law, Anthony said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. And the landscaping contract was renewed in March, Frank added, gesturing to the redacted minutes. She's been funneling HOA dues to her own family. This was the twist, the linchpin. Elaine's obsessive, irrational fixation on controlling the lakefront wasn't just about power or a misinterpretation of the rules. It was a pretext. By manufacturing a narrative that the HOA was responsible for the entire shoreline, including the parts attached to private properties like his, she could justify an inflated, ever-expanding lakefront maintenance budget. This budget, in turn, was used to award no-bid contracts to her brother-in-law's company, likely with a substantial kickback for herself. Anthony's private dock was not just a challenge to her authority. It was a direct threat to her secret, lucrative financial scheme. If he successfully affirmed his private ownership, it would set a precedent. Other lakefront owners might follow suit, shrinking the common area she claimed to manage and making it impossible to justify the exorbitant fees paid to Scenecscapes LLC. "We need the unredacted version of these minutes," Anthony said, his voice low and steady. Frank nodded slowly, a grim smile forming on his lips. "I was on the board for 10 years. I still have friends who work at the management company, people who were there long before Elaine started running things. People who don't like being told to wield a black marker to cover up their boss's corruption. Let me make a phone call." The fight had just escalated from a civil dispute over property rights to a case of potential fraud and self-dealing. Elaine Porter wasn't just a petty tyrant, she was a criminal. And now, they had a way to prove it. News of Anthony's formal records request, and his subsequent huddles with Frank Delaney, traveled quickly through the neighborhood's gossip network. Elaine must have sensed the shift in the wind, the subtle change from a lone dissenter to an organized opposition. Her response was swift and surgical, designed not to crush Anthony directly, but to isolate him by targeting his allies. A few days after Frank made his discreet phone call, Pamela found a violation notice taped to her front door. It cited a failure to maintain driveway in safe condition, referencing a hairline crack in the concrete near her garage, a crack so minuscule it had been there since she'd moved in 20 years ago. The notice demanded she have the entire driveway resurfaced within 30 days or face a $50 per day fine. For a retired librarian on a fixed income, the threat of a multi-thousand-dollar repair was terrifying. "She knows I'm helping you," Pamela told Anthony, her voice trembling slightly over the phone. "This is a warning shot." Anthony's gut twisted with guilt. He had dragged her into this. "Don't let her turn you into someone you're not." "Anthony," she said, her voice regaining its strength. "Stay calm. This is what she does. She tries to make you afraid." The next attack was even more insidious. It targeted the neighborhood's moral compass. A young mother named Julia Eng. Julia and her husband Thomas were a quiet, hard-working couple with 2 small children, living on a tight budget in one of the smaller homes. They had attended the initial meeting at Pamela's. Their support for Anthony rooted in a simple sense of fairness. Elaine's weapon against them was the threat of a special assessment. At a hastily called budget committee meeting, Elaine proposed a new lakefront beautification project, a vaguely defined initiative that would require a one-time special assessment of $2,500 per household. She argued it was necessary to enhance property values and address urgent erosion issues, the very issues her brother-in-law's company was supposedly already being paid handsomely to manage. For homeowners like Julia and Thomas, an unexpected $2,500 bill would be catastrophic. It meant canceling their kids' summer camp, dipping into their meager savings, or worse. Julia called Anthony in a panic, her voice choked with tears. "She's doing this to punish us for supporting you," Julia whispered, afraid someone might overhear. "Thomas and we can't afford this. Anthony, people are terrified. They're saying if you keep pushing this fight, you'll bankrupt the HOA with legal fees and force this assessment on all of us. Please, don't unleash hell at the annual meeting. Just be careful. Think of the families here." Her plea hit Anthony like a physical blow. This was Elaine's masterstroke. She had transformed his personal fight for justice into a potential financial catastrophe for his most vulnerable neighbors. He was now faced with a brutal moral dilemma if he went public with the evidence of Elaine's corruption. She could easily spin it as a vindictive act that would harm the entire community. He could expose her and win. But in doing so, he might inadvertently hurt the very people he was trying to protect. His victory could feel like a defeat for families like Julia's. He sat on his porch late into the night, the binder of evidence on the table beside him. The path forward was no longer a straight line. Exposing Elaine was not enough. He had to do it in a way that protected Pamela, Julia, and everyone else caught in the crossfire. He couldn't just be a destroyer, tearing down a corrupt system. He had to be a builder, offering a better way forward. The annual meeting was in 1 week. The strategy for his 5-minute speech had just become infinitely more complex. The community clubhouse buzzed with a tense, anxious energy unlike any annual meeting in Heron Point's history. Every seat was filled, and a crowd of homeowners stood 3 deep along the back walls. Elaine Porter sat at the center of the board table, a portrait of serene control, but a small, rhythmic tapping of her pen betrayed her nerves. Beside her, the representative from Patriot Management looked pale. The agenda was a dull procession of budgetary reviews and committee reports. Finally, Elaine's voice cut through the drone. "We will now move to new business. As per the bylaws, homeowners who registered in advance may address the board for a period of 5 minutes. First on the list is Anthony McAllister." A large digital clock on a projector screen behind the board was set to 5:00. As Anthony walked to the podium, the first red digit flickered to a 4. The countdown had begun. He placed his binder on the lectern, but didn't open it. He looked out at the faces in the room, some hostile, some curious, many anxious. He saw Pamela, who gave him a small, encouraging nod. He saw Julia, her expression fraught with worry. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and even, amplified slightly by the microphone. "My name is Anthony McAllister. Most of you know me as the man in a dispute over a dock, but I'm not here tonight to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about our community and the financial health of our HOA. 4:45. He clicked a button on a small remote, and the projector screen behind the board switched from the clock to a high-resolution image of the county plat map for his property. This is the official map of my lot. As you can see, the property lines, established in 1979, clearly extend into the lake. This is a legal fact." He clicked again. A side-by-side comparison appeared. On one side was CC&R for 8.4.2, the View Corridor Clause. On the other was an excerpt from the state statute governing homeowners associations. Our own CC&Rs give the board architectural control. However, state law is very clear, and HOA's authority is limited to the powers granted in its governing documents, and it cannot infringe upon the deeded property rights of a homeowner without their explicit consent. The board's interpretation of Figure 8.4.2 is, legally speaking, unenforceable. He paused, letting the words sink in. He wasn't arguing. He was educating. Bash 350. Now, I know there is concern about the financial stability of our community, specifically, a proposed special assessment for a lakefront beautification project. He looked directly at Julia. "I understand this would be a severe hardship for many families here. It is also completely unnecessary." This was the secondary moral twist. He was addressing Julia's fear directly, before making his attack. "Therefore, before I address my own situation, I want to make a formal motion. I move that the board immediately table the proposed special assessment and, as an amendment to the budget, commission a study to create a hardship fund for residents facing financial difficulties with legitimate, necessary assessments in the future. We should be a community that supports its neighbors, not one that prices them out of their homes." A murmur of surprise and approval swept through the room. He had just disarmed Elaine's primary weapon, showing himself to be a community builder, not a destroyer. He had won over the undecideds. 2:30. "The reason that assessment is unnecessary," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "is because our budget for lakefront maintenance is already grossly inflated." He clicked the remote. A new image appeared on the screen, a copy of the HOA's contract with Scenicscapes, LLC, totaling over $80,000 annually. We pay this company a fortune for services that are vaguely defined and, in many cases, applied to private property that homeowners are already maintaining themselves. Now, for the final blow. 1:15. I submitted a records request for the board meeting minutes, as is my right. This is what I received regarding the approval of this contract. The screen showed the heavily redacted page from the March meeting minutes. The board claims this information was redacted to protect proprietary vendor information. This is not true. It was redacted to hide a direct and illegal conflict of interest. He took a single sheet of paper from his binder. "This," he said, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "is the unredacted version of those minutes, provided to me by a source who believes homeowners have a right to the truth." He clicked the remote one last time. The projector screen now showed the full page. The black box was gone. In its place was the record of the vote, and a damning line item from the disclosure section. Disclosure: James Sterling, President of Scenicscapes, LLC, is the brother-in-law of Board President Elaine Porter. 010. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The silence was absolute, profound. Elaine's face was a mask of chalky white. Anthony looked directly at her. For years, our president has been using a fabricated dispute over common areas to justify an inflated budget that funnels our money directly to her own family. My dock was never the issue. It was a threat to her scheme. The clock behind him flashed 0000. His time was up. He had used every second. He stepped back from the podium, his final words falling into the heavy, stunned silence of the room. The silence that followed Anthony's final word was heavy and absolute. A vacuum where the room's collective breath had been for a long moment. No one moved. All eyes were fixed on Elaine Porter, who sat frozen, her serene mask finally shattered, revealing the raw, panicked fury beneath. Then, Frank Delaney's voice, steady and resonant, cut through the tension from the back of the room. "I make a motion," he called out, standing to his full height. "I move that the homeowners commission an immediate, independent financial audit of the last 5 years of this association's records, to be conducted by a third-party firm with no connection to this board or its management company." "Second," shouted Pamela, her voice clear and strong. The room erupted. "Aye," came a chorus of voices from every corner. Elaine finally jolted into action, banged her gavel weakly. "This is out of order. There is no motion on the floor." But her authority had evaporated. The management company representative, a man named Henderson, whose face had grown progressively paler throughout Anthony's speech, leaned over and whispered urgently in her ear. He knew a legal firestorm when he saw one. He was thinking of liability, of lawsuits, of his company's reputation. Ignoring Elaine, Charles Benton, the board vice president, spoke into his microphone. "There is a motion and a second. All in favor." A forest of hands shot up, all opposed. Only 2 hands were raised, Elaine's and that of one of her loyal board members. The motion passed overwhelmingly. Before the murmuring could subside, another homeowner stood. "I move to censure President Porter for a clear violation of her fiduciary duty and for knowingly concealing a conflict of interest from the members." Second came another shout. The vote was just as lopsided. Henderson, the management rep, saw his chance to staunch the bleeding. He stood and addressed the board, his voice strained but professional. "Given the information presented tonight and the clear will of the homeowners, I strongly advise the board to table all pending violation notices and fines levied against Mr. Anthony McAllister, pending a full review by legal counsel." Charles Benton nodded curtly. So moved. The board voted. And with a simple majority, years of harassment and thousands of dollars in potential fines against Anthony and his allies vanished into thin air. Elaine Porter was left utterly alone. Her allies on the board stared at their notes, refusing to meet her gaze. The neighbors she had intimidated for years now looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She gathered her leather portfolio, her movements stiff and jerky. Without another word, she stood and walked out of the clubhouse, not with the brisk stride of a president, but with the defeated shuffle of a deposed queen. The door swung shut behind her, leaving a community to pick up the pieces and, for the first time in a decade, to govern itself. Duryarf 10. Resolution and final surprise. Weeks later, the dust had begun to settle. The independent audit confirmed everything Anthony had uncovered, and more, revealing a pattern of non-competitive bidding and inflated invoices that went back years. The final report was a bombshell. Elaine Porter and her brother-in-law were facing potential civil and even criminal charges. The entire board resigned, and a special election was held to form a new one, with Frank Delaney reluctantly agreeing to serve as interim president. One of the new board's first actions was to create a transparency committee. They asked Anthony to serve as an advisor, a role he accepted on the condition that they would undertake a complete rewrite of the vague and weaponized clauses in the CC&Rs. His first project was helping them draft clear, fair rules for architectural changes, ensuring that no homeowner would ever again face the ambiguity he had. The neighborhood began to heal. The oppressive atmosphere of surveillance lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of community. Anthony, no longer the pariah, found himself warmly welcomed. He followed through on his promise, establishing a simple, written set of rules for his private dock. Neighbors could use it for fishing or launching a kayak. They just had to sign up on a small, weatherproof clipboard he installed at the entrance. It was a system built on mutual respect, not intimidation, and it worked perfectly. The dock became a symbol not of division, but of the new, healthier balance in Heron Point. One sunny afternoon, Jessica Ramirez, his realtor, stopped by with a bottle of champagne. They sat on the porch, watching the water. "I heard what happened," she said, smiling. "You've become something of a local legend." "Hardly," Anthony laughed. "I just wanted some peace and quiet." "Well, you earned it. Which brings me to something I probably should have told you earlier, but I couldn't due to client confidentiality." She grew serious. "The previous owner of this house, Mr. Henderson, he didn't sell because he was retiring to Florida." Anthony looked at her, curious. "He sold because of Elaine," Jessica said quietly. "He was a retired lawyer. He fought her on the exact same issue, the dock. He showed her the deed, cited the law, everything. But she buried him. Violation after violation. Fine after fine. His wife grew ill from the stress. He told me they were getting notices of intent to lien. He was afraid of losing his home. In the end, he gave up and sold, just to escape her. Elaine knew perfectly well she had no legal claim. She had already lost that fight once in principle. She just won by attrition. She deliberately and knowingly hid that history from you, assuming you'd be an easier target." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Anthony stared out at the shimmering lake, the sense of victory tinged with a somber understanding of what had come before. His fight hadn't been the first, but because he had been willing to see it through, he had ensured it would be the last. His sanctuary was finally, truly, his own.